Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yep.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and start since we are recording. We are live here with Henia Belalia, Brandon Benallie, and Jorge Arellano at our panel, Uplift's first official webinar, Creative Resistance and Community Power. So the idea with this panel really was basically, getting together a group of friends, right? A group of people that believe in the work and trust in the work. But also we wanted to have an intentional conversation about what does it mean building a sustainable movement? What does it mean building sustainability? And not just building empty momentum, but filling in the gaps where a community needs us most, and strategically moving forward as community organizers, as activists, as people of color, and as members of a global community, right? I'm gonna say a few words about our organization Uplift, just so that way we can talk a little bit about that. So Uplift is a youth-led, youth-powered coalition of organizers here in the Four Corners region, so-called Colorado Plateau. We have been doing this work for around 5 to 6 years now. The first gathering happened around 5 years ago. And every single year, we have just been gathering hundreds of youth here in the Four Corners region in different places always, because we want to talk about climate solutions, right? We want to strategically get together, those on the front lines of climate disaster, and have these conversations, build that solidarity. Uplift isn't really about campaigns or about branding ourselves. We're looking for the in-between moments so that way we can join our movements and really start having those strategic conversations, especially because the Southwest is often seen as a forgotten zone of disaster. Especially right now, right? We are determined to change that narrative, to really shift the focus back to us, and to, not allow others to parachute into our conditions, but to really showcase our community for what it is. That being said, I am happy and blessed to be here surrounded by my community. And I would like to pass the mic to Brandon, so that way allowing him a chance to introduce himself. And yes, moving on.
Awesome. Well, thank you. Thank you so much. And thanks for inviting me to be part of this stellar panel. So I'll introduce myself in my people's language. Dene. Yaate she'e Brandon Benallie dashe jene. Kenyani dene nishlon. Ose tajini dene bashishkin. Honagani dene dashe che adotcha baha dene dashe nele. Kitili adot istosendesh geshte nasha. My name is Brandon Benallie, and I am of the Towering House people born for the Hopi people. My Hopi clan is Hononongwa, which is the Badger clan, and I was raised by strong Dene women and femme people based out of Crown Point, so-called Crown Point, New Mexico, and Black Mesa, Arizona. And so we're based in, right now, we co-founded a space or a collective called the Infoshop Collective. And we're based out of the so-called capital of the Navajo Nation. In Navajo, we call it Segohodzene, but it's also known as Window Rock, Arizona. And it's sort of the political hub of the Navajo Nation. And it was very intentional that we founded a radical indigenous organizing space within the capital Navajo Nation. We feel that it was provide a lot of long-term strategic plans for us to have our base built here. And so how we started was my partner and I, her name is Redmilla Cody, and she and I, when we first moved back to Dene territory, we were involved with feeding the so-called homeless, the unsheltered in our communities and in border town settlements, such as Gallup, New Mexico, Winslow, Arizona. The Navajo Nation is very vast. It's over 27,000 square miles. Which is just a smidging of what our original territory compromised. And along these borders exist these illegal settlements known as border towns, the capitalist hubs that exist to, continue to extract and exploit native lives, lands, and intelligence. And so we would travel to these border towns and feed the unsheltered there. And we began to see this massive effort of nonprofits and charitable organizations basically demanding conditions for help. And so we were sickened by what we had witnessed and saw, and formed our own collective. I've been part of organizing since I was a child, basically. You know, as we all know, as Indigenous people on this continent, we're born into politics, and we're born into what water rights are, what land rights are, what Indigenous sovereignty is and isn't. You know, these are conversations we've all heard as Indigenous people on this continent, or as poor and displaced people on this continent, to understand what those terms are. And so I've taken a lot of my organizing principles, you know, having the privilege of being part of these conversations as a child on what water rights are, what land issues are, what exploitative industries capitalism sustains, stuff like that. And so the term mutual aid is often a term that's been co-opted by, you know, white anarchists and white socialists. And for we as Indigenous people, we know from a Diné perspective specifically, I call that, you know, kinship. You know, being a good relative, and kinship is beyond human to human relations. It's, you know, my kinship to the rivers, my kinship to the mountains, and my kinship to the land. And when I speak about this type of kinship, it's not like an avatar, magical, romanticized way of kinship. You know, it is like we actually view the rivers and mountain as relatives. I don't mean to like anthropomorphize or put human traits on the rivers or mountains, but to reestablish that, you know, what does it make to be a good kin? And so we typically see this type of kinship making with the work that we do. And so we started doing it since 2014. We formed the Infoshop, and there's a collective of that fluctuates between 7 to 10 of us here. And, you know, our guiding principles, I mean, it's good to read what I call the Beards had written in Europe, but, you know, our anarchism and socialism is guided by Black feminist scholars and Indigenous scholarship as well. That's where we lay our foundations on. You know, Black feminism showed us the structures that harm us all, and Indigenous feminism tells us that these structures are built on stolen land. And so we must do all that we can together to destroy these structures so that we can achieve total liberation and autonomy for all.
Thank you so much, Brandon. That's beautiful. And I feel like you hit on a lot of the points that this panel is actually about. I wanted to ask you to just kind of build on that, on what you just spoke. What struggles, as we are facing them in the community, how are you currently resisting? And also to introduce, as we are mentors to young organizers, what are movement lessons or movement wisdom that you wish you had learned sooner in this work?
So the first one is, it's always US imperialism, right? There's always policies that prevent us from living healthy and dignified lives. And often these policies were written by dead men, or they're written by people in office right now. So there's policies like, for example, the Navajo Nation, you know, there's a sensationalized media story or narrative that the Navajo Nation is this hotspot, like, oh, look at the poor Navajos, you know, as though we've chosen to live this way. You know, as though we've chosen to have our water irradiated from over 3,000 abandoned uranium mines, as though we've chosen to have our water, our aquifers and natural springs depleted from resource colonization, such as from coal mining, as though we were experiencing respiratory problems before COVID-19 from having, at one point, 4 coal mines within the northeastern portion of our territory, 4 coal-fired power plants, you know, that release mercury and other toxins into the air. And then not too many people know this, but in the Four Corners area in the 1960s, specifically 1967, you know, we were detonating nuclear bombs where that coal basin is to release the natural gases that exist there. So, you know, these aren't choices. We're not the poor natives. You know, we're an example of racist imperialist policies by the United States. So that's obviously like the overall challenge, not just for Indigenous people here in this continent, but around the world. And then specifically what we face here at home is, you know, our our ability to undermine the Navajo Nation government, because it's not really our government. It was formed as a business council to basically sign coal mining and oil leases in 1920s to these coal mining oil companies. So this business council formed into what's currently our Navajo Nation government that's trying really hard to replicate the three-branch government of the so-called United States. So, I mean, it definitely has its flaws, obviously. And one of those flaws is it's an inability to provide meaningful mutual aid during this crisis. I always say there's opportunities in crisis, right? So this is our opportunity to like show how not only how unorganized, like the fallacy of, you know, this three-branch government and its ability to provide, but to also to build up that confidence within our communities and ourselves that we're able to live autonomously in a healthy and dignified way that doesn't rely on the so-called three-branch system. So right now our struggle is, you know, the Navajo Nation has enforced these curfews that extend throughout the weekend. And then people are hungry. There are families that need food and water, and we're unable to do that because of the curfews. And it's very, the citations are very high, meaning there's like $1,000 fine if you're caught driving the roads, and possibly 30 days in jail. So, you know, exponentially rising the risk of you, you know, contracting COVID-19 in numerous ways, while also extracting, you know, what little resources you have as an Indigenous person. So that's one of the challenges here, you know, like continuing to instill the confidence in our people that all we have is each other. Ultimately, all we have is each other. Ultimately, we were built to organize and build around this that didn't rely on settler structures of governance, and that we can do this in a way that doesn't mean that we go to pre-contact, you know, like that romanticized notion of pre-contact. You know, that's not what it is. It's about, you know, using our lifeways and teachings to build a healthier future for all, not just the net people, but for all poor, displaced, and dispossessed people, and to instill that confidence in them. So lessons for my younger self. The first thing I can think of easily, you know, is how cis-hetero men break movements. And for any cis-hetero men who are part of this, no matter how woke or traditional you are, if you're unwilling, if you continue to like center yourself over the lived experience of non-binary people within these movements, you know, you're not only just hurting yourself, you're hurting the movement towards total liberation for everyone. And that's something that I took a long time. You know, I had the privilege of growing up culturally strong, like speaking the language, attending ceremonies. You know, I have male privilege, being a cis-hetero man, and not realizing I was taking up so much space at that time, and beating the traditional stick around. So if young men, cis-hetero men that are part of this movement can learn to recognize our unhealthy attitudes, because so much work, when you look at this panel organized by, you know, non-binary folks, during this whole mutual aid, I could probably count on one hand the number of cis-hetero men who are actually organizing on mutual aid efforts, who are leading those efforts. And for whatever reason, they tend to take up the most space and create the most disruptions during this time. So that's my plea to you, to cis-hetero men, is to become a healthy person, to recognize the unhealthy behaviors that we have that harm these movements. That's one message I could give to my younger self. And the second is to probably develop your principles enough that you can absorb the good advice from the bad advice. Because if you don't have like deep roots in your convictions of your organizing principles, you're going to float from movement to movement. And eventually you're going to get burned out, because a lot of places, especially the nonprofit industrial complex, you know, they're going to devour your youth. They're going to devour your energy, and they're going to spit you out. And so, you know, hold on to these strong socialist anarchist principles in your indigeneity, you know, like your roots deep within the land on this continent. Hold on to that, and, you know, recognize that there are people who will devour that energy from you. Because right now people are talking about wishing things go back to normal, right? Like, I want things to go back to pre-COVID. Well, the normal is harmful. It's a violent past. And so this violent past is like a lot of nonprofit industries, they want to go back to that violent past. They want to continue those structures of violence. And so we now have that ability. There's, like I said, there's opportunities in crisis. We now have that ability to destroy these structures and to remove ourselves from the violence that was so-called normalcy previous to this pandemic that has hit us as we exist today.
Yeah, and that's really testament, right, to who's in control and who's empowered through these shifts, right? It really is testament to not just, even as you're naming as our relatives on the streets are being, taken and incarcerated, it really shows you who the priority is to criminalize and who the priority is to continue to dispose of in this community and in this moment. And I think with that in mind, a lot of the current shifts in organizing are just that they're cultural, right? They're building a culture of disposability, a culture of criminalization of bodies of color. They're building that. So in what ways is culture and creativity coming from our side? How is that changing organizing? What have you seen?
From the culture aspect, I've seen a lot less liberalism. As we understand it in the so-called United States, and of course it means a totally different thing in the other continents. This fallacy that we just all have to work together without addressing the nuances that exist between, settler colonial policies of what so-called good capitalism or green capitalism. I'm seeing the culture shift. I've been like the veil is being lifted. Like green capitalism isn't saving us right now. These settler policies aren't saving us right now. It's the day-to-day work of mutual aid and direct support, direct action that's, feeding people right now. And so along with that comes the discourse of what decolonization is and isn't, what a capitalist free future looks like. So that's the culture I see shifting now in younger organizers, which is great because, like I said, in my experience in high school was the nonprofit industrial complex, sinking their teeth into our youth, as I said, to fill their coffers with that energy that we have, but also being primed for being brainwashed into like, this is the liberal future that we could build. And so that's the cultural shift I see. And how easy it is, how mutual aid isn't just the reallocation of resources, but how mutual aid is the manifestation of labor, of our manifestation of being kind and compassionate to each other that exists beyond, delivering food and water. Human hands and human intelligence built these systems, right? Humanity built these things, not corporations, not, these ideas are controlled and owned, but it was human intelligence that built this. And so that's the culture of shifting I'm seeing now. It's like, we don't have to rely on charity. We don't have to rely on the goodwill of corporations giving us tax breaks, essentially. Now I'm seeing that shift to where we could control those resources of humanity. We've outsourced so much of our humanity to inhuman structures. And now I'm seeing that cultural shift that, that human beings created this this compassion, this empathy, this strident movement towards a healthy, dignified life for all. So that's why I see that now. It's like, it's not some imaginary person behind a desk who's like, making ventilators or giving us masks to wear. It's human beings who decided to freely give this information for the sake of all. So that's a shift I'm seeing more and more now.
Right, and I think that's a really good segue into this next question, which actually asks about the long term. But I just want to point out that you just touched on something huge that I feel like a lot of people are missing on this conversation, which is that mutual aid is not a single term action. It's not something that you do once. It's not charity, but it's literally a long term attempt at like having that solidarity with our community. One of the things that I was, telling Henia was about how we have emails that trace back all the way to 2014, 2013, because we have been engaging in this work. And I remember foolishly as a young organizer when I got into this thinking, oh, I'm going to do this for a year or two and then I'll drop off. You know, that's how it works. But it's a lifestyle and it's a long-term commitment. So my last question for you would be, how do we organize for the long term and build resistance movements that last?
That's a tough one because I can only speak from a Diné perspective. And I'm always wary if anybody has all the answers, right? Because for us to build something, it requires webinars like this. It requires free access to knowledge and knowledge sharing and skill sharing to build what that future can be. As you said, like, mutual aid isn't an event or a series of events. You know, it is a it's a long-term commitment to ensuring a healthy and dignified life for all. And again, what we're seeing is labor in any and all forms committing to this movement, to this long-term concrete project. That's one thing to instill in people, right? Is like, sometimes they can't fathom what does a future look like without capitalism. And it's like, we're looking at it now, like with mutual aid, like we're looking at it right now. That's a shimmer of hope that exists that we could follow. So that's one way of looking at it. So for me, again, as I said, I think it takes more conversations like this to build, and some folks will see this as a socialist future, an anarchist future, or something both, or maybe it's something that doesn't exist yet. I mean, even I sometimes, grapple with the term what anarchism is, and I do identify as indigenous anarchist or decolonial anarchist, because you invite a lot of baggage that comes with that terminology, and it usually centers old dead white men, right? We tend to inherit the debates of Europe into indigenous society when we begin to look at those deep nuances of socialism versus anarchism and so on. And so I think the onus is on us right now, like you and the panelists and everyone else watching, is to come together more and build that future that's indigenous to our territories here, that doesn't exclude the poor, displaced, and dispossessed peoples who exist on our territories now. And I think that's what a lot of the answer ultimately isn't statehood, it isn't nationhood. It's building a collective future for all that's healthy and dignified. And I think that's probably what freaks out a lot of people when indigenous people talk about liberation, to think we're talking about creating another ethno-state, when it's completely false from that. They're applying their own European notions of what a nation or state is when we talk about liberation. And so I would like to have more conversations like, because I admittedly, I am in a bubble. I read a lot of Black feminist scholarship and indigenous scholarship from here. And admittedly, I need to learn more about other indigenous feminisms and Black feminisms that exist, so that we can continue to create this framework of what can we build together that's a healthy and dignified life for everyone. I can only see it from a Diné perspective, from an anarchist perspective, on what that future could be, and to not perform, but to live that reality as much as I can, to instill power within, which is what I really liked about anarchism, is like to build that power within, that confidence within, not just from an individualist standpoint, but for a collectivist standpoint. Because a healthy group, is stronger, better able to repel the violence of state or the violence of capitalism.
Well, thank you for that beautiful answer. I think, first of all, I'm so excited. As soon as you started saying we should start having more conversations like this, I was like, oh, snap. Okay, so second webinar, already planning it, already in the books. We're just going to keep talking about these conversations, these moments of, future seeking. I think one of my favorite things that I've been really getting into is speculative fiction, just really talking to other nerds about why wouldn't we think of a different future? Why settle for this future that has already been established, right? Mm-hmm. With that in mind, thank you so much, Brandon. I'm gonna pass the mic to my sis, Henia Belalia, and ask you to introduce yourself, your community, the work you do, and talk a little bit about what struggles you're facing in your community and how you're currently resisting.
Right on. Assalamu alaikum. My name is Henia or Henia. I want to say Eid Mubarak, Eid Kum Mabruk to all my Muslims out there who had to do a month of Ramadan and a celebration of Eid away from our families, which is not how it's supposed to go down. So all the love to y'all. Brandon, thank you so much for all your sharings. It was actually really great to hear everything that you just shared. A little about me. My people are from the northern Sahara Desert, though most of my family since then has moved to the coast of Algeria, North Africa. And the other side of my family is from a little village in the middle of nowhere in northeast of France. Currently, however, I'm hailing from traditional Ohlone territory, more specifically the village of Hochin, what we know now as the city of Oakland in the Bay Area. So first off, I want to say I'm a little sad to hear folks calling the Southwest this forgotten zone, because I feel like there is so much richness to the Southwest. I got the blessing to live out there for 6-7 years, and there's so much leadership, there's so much direction, and there's so much that comes from what is known as the Southwest, and specifically from the indigenous communities there. So I don't know who's calling it a forgotten zone, but whatever, right? When I first moved to the United States, the place I would call home here is the Bay Area. But I want to say I was raised by the Bay, but the Bay didn't birth me. And that's a really important thing and relevant thing to say today when we're talking about the Bay, right? Because when you're asking me what the struggles are over here, we know poverty and gentrification, folks being priced out of their homes. So many of my loved ones have been removed from their homes and their homelands. And all of the ills that come with living in like big, overcrowded, overpriced urban areas, from police brutality to racial profiling to there's a lot of human trafficking here. We live really close to a port, so a lot of shady things go down. And also talking about food, right? Talking about our main supply and our main demand. A lot of folks are actually very isolated from that. Like, where does food come from? Which is very important in a time like the ones we're in now, right? So all that to say, I'm part of a diaspora myself, right? Which means I'm thousands of miles away from my ancestral lands. I often pray in a tongue that is foreign to my ancestors and ask forgiveness for that. I miss out daily on my grandmother's jokes, on my grandmother's teachings, on my grandmother's knowledge of plants. She has rich knowledge of plants and medicine. There's things I was never able to learn from her, right? Like how she can weave carpets, and the ways that she tended to our lands, and there's so much, right? And that's the story of the diaspora, I think, for a lot of us, is how do we hold on, how do we connect, how do we remember, right? How do we relearn all the things that we once have known? What my focus has been out here for the last several years, I'm working with an organization that runs media literacy meets social justice programs. We work with youth ages 12 to 18. And I always knew that the narrative was important, and I always knew media was important in my work as an organizer, and like all the, how do we tell the story and whatnot, and how do we push our story and not become, victims to mass mainstream media, but then to really work and really dig in. I'm like, oh, right, there's so much there, right? There's so much in the toxic culture of stereotypes, of cultural appropriation, of tokenizing, of, lies passing off as like objective historical truths in our textbook, and the invisibilization of communities, tokenism, right? Or just the fact that we're data points, right, for these big media conglomerates, right? Like every time we log on to any of our social media platforms or whatever, we're really data points, right? And we're like golden, like it's data is gold for them, right? As far as how they sell things to us. And of course the invasion of privacy that comes with that. And so I feel like today, I have the privilege of still having a job, you know what I mean? And so I think this divide of the haves and the have-nots, and folks who may not have considered themselves folks who have, right? But now you have a job, so actually you're in that category, right? If right now you have a job and you have any kind of a paycheck, you just whoop, because you just moved into this category that maybe your ancestors were never part of or whatnot, but you now have access to things. And so I feel like what I want to speak to is like where the youth that I work with, where they're at, right? A lot of them are locked in homes with their abusers. A lot of them are cut off from their social interactions, which at that age, right, 12 to 18, if y'all can remember your middle and high school days, your peers, right? Your peers are so very important in your development. Youth, you know, if you're talking about this digital divide, right? The youth who has access to devices, who has access to internet, who has access to, you know, parents in the home who can support them and navigate this online learning, right? So these divides that we were talking about are getting just exacerbated today by just how youth are able to have access to each other and to learnings, right? And then also this fear. I hear that from a lot of them, this fear of the unknown. Like, you know, I want to shout out to any seniors who are listening, like all the love to y'all. Like, I know that there was a lot of precious moments that were robbed from you of how you were planning to live out the last few months with your peers, and what does it mean for, you know, like even the things like, all right, whatever, prom is, you know, we could talk about prom and the problems of that, but just like that, the celebration that youth may have had, right? And just that fear of the unknown of graduating into what? Right? Graduating into what, like what's next? How long is this going to last? And then also just knowing that some of their own parents are themselves the essential workers that are being sacrificed, right? They're like, oh, you go to work and don't worry, we may not have any protective equipment for you, but go to work. And some of them who just don't have access to work, just period, right? And a lot of the youth who were coming to schools and found safety there, and also found hot meals there, right? So that's when I'm thinking about the community that I'm part of various communities, right? But the part of the community that I really want to uplift today is the youth and what this has meant for them. And then going back to this, like, right now we're in a category where some of us still have work. Like, please tell me that you just redistributed your entire stimulus check. Please tell me that every week you're setting aside money and you are just getting it out. Because if you still have a job, if you have a roof over your head, if you have food in your fridge, and you have water like available to you to drink, and you know that your homies, your family, your folks you may not even know don't have access to that, that's part of the redistribution that has to happen within the society that we're in right now, which obviously money is what it is today and people need it to survive. I'm excited to talk about futures that look different, but you know, realistically, I think that folks need to be talking about that. What does it mean to really take responsibility for the new privileges that maybe you didn't think of before when you just thought, oh, this is work and that's it.
Yeah, totally. I definitely have been thinking a lot about what does it mean to redistribute not just aid in monetary fashion, but also to establish a culture of mutual aid, right? Like something that I've been really thinking about telling folks is like, please consider volunteering to a mutual aid network at least an hour a week. Like I know here locally at Migrant Mutual Aid Utah, we desperately need volunteers. Even just an hour of your time a week is so precious and will definitely help us build capacity in our organizing. You know, there's been this divide between who is an organizer, who's an activist, and who's a regular person for so long in the culture of organizing that I really hope that we come out of this with that, if anything, eliminated the idea that like the homies from the streets are organizers, the people in your community are organizers, your mom, your grandmother, she's an organizer because they are constantly organizing to make sure that you are alive and that you are fed. With that in mind, as one of my mentors and someone that I look up to, I wanted to ask you, what is a movement lesson or movement wisdom that you wish you had learned sooner? And then transitioning from that, talking a little bit about how the current shifts in organizing are cultural, and in what ways is culture and creativity changing the culture of organizing?
Nice. Yeah, I think one of the lessons I wish I had had early on is practicing various roles in the movement. Don't just do what you're good at. Really rotate. I think that you get good at something, people see that you're good at something and they call on you to do that, you keep doing that, and all of a sudden you're like 10 years in and you're like, oh, I never went to enough of those medic trainings. Like, hold up, I actually need to know how to step up in that role. And so I think just knowing that you may need to, you know, dabble in a little bit of everything. It took me a few years to realize that. I think, you know, doing your ego work and doing your spirit work. I really appreciate what Brandon shared earlier, and I think that's for all of us, right? Like, what does your ego work look like? What is your like, how do you come in a good way? How do you come having done whatever you needed to do for yourself to be able to come in a good way? Because you know, there's gonna be messy, abusive, and shitty relationships and movements. And if you haven't done your own ego work to come in a good way, then how can you expect to step up, right? And on that too, like, I wish that I had been told, just because you're in a radical space doesn't mean it's going to be safe. Just because you're in a radical space doesn't mean that it's actually inclusive. Just because you're over here with all these people who have similar politics to you doesn't mean that there's not going to be mad transphobia and mad homophobia and mad, you know, all the things, right? And a lot of the times we didn't get taught, sometimes because we've been taken away from our traditional, you know, our traditional practices and our elders, we didn't get taught how to deal with these things. We didn't get taught accountability. We didn't get taught, like, how are you going to do this? And how do you deal with it before it gets really bad, right? Because definitely, and you know, sis, I know you and I have been in this thing for a minute, so we've been through a lot of these, right? But like, so many moments have been not dealt with. We didn't, like, trust your gut. Like, that's one of my, trust your gut, follow your heart, know what you know. If something isn't right, act on it. Find other people to act on it with, because don't let it get to the point where it blows up, because it happens and it's heartbreaking, right? It's heartbreaking to see that happen in our spaces. And also because it's heartbreaking, I think it gets hidden a lot. And I think people don't want to talk about it. And I think it's almost like we don't want to look bad, right? We don't want to say like, oh, well, we're radical, but we actually, you know, like, nah, like, we got to speak on it. We got to name those things, right? And then I think the other thing, I wish that we had spent a lot more time thinking about transitioning away from the systems. I think that a lot of us are, you know, direct action, let's go, stop what doesn't work, you know, like, stop the machine. And I think that there was always some people that are like, what, you know, transitioning, let's do so, you know, and I was like, yeah, we'll get to that. And actually, nah, like, there needs to be equal energy to what you don't want to what you actually do want. And like, as much energy put in the vision of what we actually want instead, right? And I know I want to say also, that's very hard advice to give and to take when you're in survival mode. And I get that. When you're in survival mode and all you can think of is like stopping the harm and getting through the day. I understand that having time and space and spirit for, you know, for something else is really hard. So I do want to say that comes with that comes with its own limitations. But yeah, and taking breaks when you need to take breaks, that it's okay to take some breaks, you know, even if it's just like, tonight I'm getting a full night's sleep or whatever that is. Because as Ella said, you know, we're in this is a lifestyle. This is lifelong. You know, I've heard people mention it as a marathon, but it says that this is it, you know, like, so taking care of our bodies, our spirits, our hearts, is mad important.
Yes. Oh my gosh. I am so bad at taking care of myself through it all. You've seen me. I go into work mode and I just zoom. I just can't stop.
You get beautiful and amazing things done all the time, but you need to sleep.
But then you burn out, and I think that's one of the conversations again to talk about, like, how do we change the culture of organizing? Because, you know, if you just pile up all of your wood and you just light it all on fire, I mean, you're gonna be really warm, but that's all your wood. So I don't know what you were planning to do for, you know, the next meal, the next day, the next month. So yeah, with that in mind, as a lot of the current shifts in organizing are cultural, in what ways is culture creative changing organizing? And then maybe talking a little bit about how do we organize for the long term? You know, like, do you, I know me and Brendan, we just basically said we don't have an answer.
Yep,
but yeah, just wondering what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, no, I vibe with that. I'm like, I definitely don't got all the answers. Let's all add our little pieces. But as far as the cultural shift, so again, I've been really focused on like narratives, right? And media and working with media to create their own media. And a lot of what I talk to them about is that who gets to tell the story matters, right? Who has the power to tell the story, who has the airtime, who has the megaphone, who has the money behind it really matters. And with the youth, and I think part of how they're shifting the culture is that a lot of them have power at their fingertips, right? Because now we have access to social media and digital media. And a lot of them are like, nah, like, you know, a lot of, I don't know how many of y'all, you know, will watch Netflix or binge on what Netflix, maybe as part of your self-care. But if you've been noticing, there's been a lot more shows with folks of color, right? Many of them still very problematic, but there's a lot more. And that's because the young people are asking for that, right? The young people are out there saying like, we want to be represented. We want to represent ourselves. This isn't how it needs to go, and are telling their own stories, right? And so I think because of that, I really appreciate how many times, Brandon, you brought up confidence, because I do think it is about like our youth, our folks of color, folks who have been marginalized, to regain that confidence, to put ourselves back at the center, because truth is, we have the solutions, right? The people most impacted are the ones who have the solutions. And I think that I'm starting to see some of that in the culture, and how folks are telling their stories and how folks are taking up space. And I think it's also allowing us as communities of color to reconcile some beef, right? Because truth is, the way that the system has been set up by the white man, right, is to make sure that we're all fighting each other, and to make sure that we're all noticing our differences, and we're all beefing for scraps, and we're always thinking of like, what's the opposite of abundance? Scarcity, right? And I think that a lot of the ways that culture is shifting is that we're able to see each other. We're able to just like, oh, hey, I see you, you know what I mean? Like gain confidence in ourselves, gain confidence in our communities. And because of that, because of having all of that and seeing ourselves in the art that's being created, and there's, you know, shout out to Jorge and to you, Ella, for the art that y'all create, because that's really, really important in building up that confidence, right? And so I think like as marginalized voices are being more centered, and I think through, you know, through the narratives that are being created, folks are getting a glimpse of that table, right? And bringing our own folding chair to the table if we can't be at the table, right? I'm directly stealing that quote from somebody, but I can't remember who said it right now. So shout out to who first said it. How do we organize for the long term? I mean, I think that some of what's happening right now is this long-term thinking, right? Of like, how do we survive without this messiness of a society when we're so like deeply entrenched in it? And so I think like I'm hearing a lot of conversations. Folks are talking about gardening. Folks are talking about planting. Folks are talking, especially, right, we're like in an urban setting where it's hard to do that kind of stuff here, right? When you're just like piled up on top of each other. And I think that is really, really important. I think developing survival skills is really important. So again, folks who are living in cities, do y'all know how to start a fire, right? Do y'all know how to find some edible plants in case you are stuck out there? Have you planned for the earthquake? You know what I mean? Like we really need to be thinking about these things that were always just like far away. It's right now, right? It's right here and it's right now. And I think getting all of, talking with your pods, talking with your crews, right? Talking with whoever your family is. I think especially right now, like the landscape is new for us to navigate, right? Like, I mean, here in the Bay, we've got car protests. We've got people, I don't know if this happened in your places too, but people are like, all right, we can't rally. We're going to get in the car and do a protest. And we're going to go to the mayor's house because there's too many unhoused folks out there sleeping outside. And, you know, like, so there's new things that are happening, but also we need to continue protecting our most vulnerable folks, right? And so how do we do that and also navigate this landscape? And I think that for the long term, folks need to be talking with like, who is your crew? If you didn't know before who your crew is, like the folks that you roll with, and what are your, how do you move together? And I think we need to actually create safer and more inclusive spaces. I think it goes back to that. So what kind of homework do we have to do to actually be there for each other? You know, what does land back to Indigenous folks look like? What does reparations to Black folks look like? What are resources to undocumented and vulnerable folks look like? What does it mean to protect our trans and gender nonconforming and queer communities, right? Like, what is that work? And that's always long-term resistance. So what does it look like to educate each other, to do our own homework, and to create those those spaces. And as much as we can to work from a place of abundance, and that's just like on a deep spirit level, like how do we call in abundance and see into the future when we've been taught to think of scarcity and think of ourselves as like the poor, right? Like you were saying, like there's nothing poor about us. We're over here surviving these wild ass systems. So I don't know, but that's my pieces.
I love it. I love it how we're all coming to the same conclusion. We don't know, but we are trying it out. And that goes back into like the conversations that we're having about ego, right? There's this idea that like we have to have all the answers. We have to come up with a solution. We have to look at the 1 + 1 + 1 must equal 3. And it's like there's a lot of missing elements, mystical, beautiful elements that are not actually a part of the equation because we can't see them, a perception, the things that we cannot see and the things that we cannot sense, right? So thank you so much, Henia, for those beautiful, beautiful answers. I want to go ahead and pass the mic to my comrade, favorite punk uncle, Jorge Arellano. And let you introduce yourself a little bit, introduce your community, and what are some struggles happening in your community right now. Y si lo quieres hacer en español, yo te traslado como tú quieras.
Está bien, lo hago en inglés. All right, so, well, I want to do it in English. And first of all, I'm pretty happy to be here. This is the first webinar I ever do in my life. I'm not really fond of technology. But yeah, well, my name is Jorge Arellano. I'm from Tasco Guerrero in Mexico. And I used to say that I'm an immigrant. Now I like to say that I just move around, I end up here in Utah over 20 years ago. And I'm an anarchist. I'm a punk rocker. I'm an artist. Some of the things and projects I work on, I have a couple bands that we used to sing about normal problems that everybody has every day in their lives. A lot of the issues involve immigration and stuff like that. I also created Stencil Jam a long time ago to kind of like make art and pass it around, kind of just bring it as a support for a protest and people in need to express that are not don't have the same chance to create art and things like that. And also I'm part of the Nopalera Collective, which is artist collective of people of color that we started here in Utah. It's been a while that we kind of like in hiatus for a little bit, but we're still here and we're planning a lot of things, like you'll see them coming soon. Well, I don't have much to say about myself. I think we're talking about creative resistance and community power. And when I think about that, I think about my community. And this is a question that brings all these ideas like what's community to me? Like, is it a group that I decided to form to become my community? Or is it just a group of people that because the way I move around in my life, I'm surrounded by them and they become my community. And when I think about those things, I really understand that my community is the people that is closest to me, my neighbors, my family in particular, because we are the ones that are in this little area. We concentrate in this little area. And some of the problems that we struggle with, it's still up to today. And we keep talking about it. It's discrimination, right? Not too long ago, my brother and myself were pulled over by a cop just by our looks. There was no excuse to pull us over. We ended up in court and everything was just dropped because there was nothing to persecute, And we even mentioned to the cop, like, what's the deal? What are you stopping us for? Well, I just checking, blah, blah, blah. The bullshit they always talk. But when you're a teenager and you live all these things, you probably think, all right, I think I just got to resist and fight it. But when you become older and the same stuff keeps happening to you, then you need to understand how you're going to organize, how you're going to protect yourself, how you're going to protect your community from all of this. There has to be a point when you decide enough is enough. And you don't want to make it the way you live anymore. You want to make it the way you don't want to live anymore. And then you have to fight for it. So some of the things we do in our community, first of all, like I'm looking at my window, that's why I turn this way. But when I look at my neighborhood, you know, I talk to the people here, say like, let's just not call the cops. Let's just, if there's an issue, let's try to resolve it between ourselves. That person over there called the cops. Maybe let's go talk to them and see what's the deal, why they're doing that. They shouldn't be doing that. And we try to protect each other. We don't agree with the neighborhood watch and all these things, you know. We rather come together, and even though I'm talking like that, it's just like 5-6 people, you know. It's not like the whole block, or it's not like the whole neighborhood. But these are the things that we do to resist. And when I move a little far from my neighborhood, then I start thinking about my family. All right, my family struggles a lot from a lot of different things. It can be discrimination, poverty, abuse on their jobs sometimes. Like they make them work a lot and they pay them a little bit. You know, they don't pay them that much. So also some of them have immigration issues. You know, recently we lost a couple family members because of the COVID in our country, back in our home, and a lot of us are not able to go. Not only because of what's happening with the airports and stuff, but it's just impossible to travel. So we have to live like that, and we have to start thinking that we need to start creating ideas to resist all these problems that we face in our community. You know, so that's when I start thinking about, okay, so we're gonna start getting together every week and talk about all the problems that we have and try to help each other, support each other. So we're always keeping an eye on each other, you know. And these are the only ways that you can do when the government, the president right now, it's just bringing all these stupid laws and regulations with immigration. You know, some of my family members are stuck in the limbo. They have nowhere to go. There's nothing good that is coming for them and in their status or things like that. You know, their jobs are probably not going to change. So a way to resist this is start creating, like start working on our own, like become self-employed, start our own business, also hire our own people from our community to teach them how to learn how to do something, and then maybe they can start their own business as well, you know. And we've been doing this for many years, and I think it works perfect for us. Sometimes I feel like I belong to Utah, but sometimes I feel like I don't belong to Utah because I move from place to place, you know. So when I got here, there was people already living here, and we have to acknowledge that. Yeah. So the people that live here, we have to respect the way how they lived in before, and then we have all the people from Europe that move here. So now it's just a big mess. And what we need to do is really start thinking as a community, how can we protect each other? How can we support each other and identify these particular cases where people is in need and people is resisting against something like, I say, discrimination or police brutality or police abuse, you know, things like that.
Yes, 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 yes. And exactly, especially as we're talking about, so first of all, right, we're here on Shoshone territory, so-called Salt Lake City. And I think when we, by living here, we're seeing this culture of white supremacy that creeps into our community and that just normalizes, not just, you know, calling the cops, but also looking at criminalized identities as inherently disposable, right, in our community, as we don't belong. And I think that's something that for me has been really inspiring about, you know, having you as a mentor. You know, I always tell people I call Jorge my punk uncle or my punkle, because the first time we met was actually at a punk show, at a basement show here in a house in Rose Park. And I remember he was the only other brown person in the room, and I was just like, oh my gosh, who's this person? You know, I'm so excited. Even as we were, you know, blowing fists in the mosh pit. So I think that's something for me, something that you've taught me is joyful resistance, you know, joyful militant resistance, and expressing in our joy, not just you know, how happy we're to survive, but also how enraged we are that this has gone as long as 500 years. Seriously, like we're just gonna have to keep doing this. I mean, happy to do it, but damn, it's a living, right? I guess touching on that, so what are movement lessons or movement wisdom that you wish you had learned sooner? Especially again, because you do work with youth, and this is part of the work that we're engaged with here at Uplift.
Yeah. So this is a pretty nice question, because I actually think that I haven't learned any lessons. I don't learn. I keep making mistakes, you know. But it's good. It's good to make mistakes. When I look back, there are certain things that I particularly think about. "Oh, I wish I did it different. You know, I did this different or not." But it's funny, because some of the same mistakes I keep making them now. And just to give you just a little example, like Henia and Brandon have talked about their perspective, how they think about that part. And I want to talk about more like looking into the artistic part. You know, like when I was pretty young, I started learning how to do like drawings and spray painting and all these things. And I saw like how other people will communicate through that on the streets. Because I live in a really poor neighborhood. But instead of following that beautiful creativity and expression, I started keeping everything for myself. And for many years, I did so many things that I kept in a little room, and I would end up destroying them or hiding them from everybody. So I think that was a big mistake, because now when I think about it, I remember about certain pieces that I said, what's happening right now, that piece will be perfect to bring it, but you know, it's not possible. I can't bring it back. So one thing it would be that one lesson that I probably, something I will do different is share that knowledge and share the time I spent creating art for the movement with younger people in particular, because we're like in an exit sometimes. You know, we're like, we keep doing the same, but we know there's a point where we're gonna have either stop, or we're just gonna not live in this earth anymore. So it would be nice if you can pass that knowledge into people that is younger than you, and especially kids that are not using those tools on the right way. You know, sometimes when I say the right way, is because I have experienced young people like they're doing stuff on the street and they get caught, and then that becomes a bigger problem, and that problem passes into the parents, and the parents end up in a really big mess. So now, when I look in the past, I understand that sharing that experience and making sure that you can create this type of art without being repressed or being in trouble is really important. You know, I don't know if it makes sense, but
No, that does make sense. One of my favorite stories that you've told me is, sorry, I'm getting emotional. Is I remember when if you know me in real life, I get really emotional really fast. Um one of my favorite things that you shared with me was when you said that you took your mother's sewing needle and you wrapped tape around it, right, to make your first stencil as a young punk teenager in Mexico. And for me, that's just, again, that's the work. That's pretty amazing. And you changed my life, honestly, Jorge. You really did.
yeah.
Again, sorry, getting emotional. That, you know, that being said, right, talking a little bit about culture and art, a lot of the current shifts in organizing right now, happening right now, are cultural. So in what ways is culture and creativity changing organizing? And then to build on that question, just to finish it up, because we're reaching we're time check, it's almost we're
Mhm.
almost an hour in. How do we organize for the long term and build resistance movements that last?
Okay,
The
I'll try to be
question that
fast
we
on this
never
one.
have an answer to.
Okay, I'll try to be fast on this one. So about the cultural shift, you know, I think that
Oh, sorry. I was just trying to say, I didn't mean like hurry. I just meant like, so
oh,
panelists would be aware we might go a little bit over, if that's okay.
all
Okay.
right. Okay, so when we talk about cultural, I think it really doesn't apply to everybody in our communities. You know, we have people in our communities that have the opportunity to use, for example, technology, use the social media, use the be on a webinar, you know. And there are people even in my own band that don't have any of that, and they have no interest in participating, you know. So the only thing they do is it's go out and protest on the streets and do the direct action themselves, and they're used to it, you know. And then when we have a cultural change like this, when we are facing this problem with the COVID, and everybody suddenly is back in their homes, I see the danger, and I see the importance for us to be careful and take care of ourselves. But I also see the media, how they utilize all of that to keep us in a place where, you know, a couple months ago, people was exploding all over the world, in Chile and different countries. And now everybody's back home. In Mexico, women were like, all the feminists went out and they were doing such a beautiful job. And now they're all gone. So this is part of the cultural change that is happening. And sometimes I think that if we accept these changes, it's going to be a negative impact on the movement, on the people that is out there with the protest, doing the protest on the direct action, you know. So all I want to say is that it's some kind of sometimes dangerous if you don't know how to use these changes, in particular when you're used to be out there and now you can't be out there. So that can affect you pretty bad. And for the ones that have access to all this technology and have access to use the social media and communicate in different ways, I think it would be really important for us to start thinking how we're going to combine those two things and find new ways of resistance against all these changes. And the last question was, what was the last question?
Era cómo hacemos para que el movimiento siga yendo para la larga.
Okay, I think how we make this movement last, or you know, be there present. To me, it's really simple. It's really simple. All the things that we have learned, all the things that we have experienced in life. Instead of saying I'm part of this group, I'm part of this collective, I'm part of this band, I support this nonprofit, I understand these students, I understand feminists when they go on the streets. Instead of thinking about all these groups, I think it would be a great idea just to put all that together and turn it into a way of life, like an everyday life, something you do every day, you know. Nothing like tomorrow I have a meeting here, or tomorrow I'm going to go to this protest. If you start thinking these are necessary things you have to do, then they're just going to go away one day. But if these are things that you learn, make them your way of life, they're going to last forever. Because every day you get up, you're going to think about what you're going to do next. You know, if you just start being in groups, that's going to disappear one day. You start a collective, it's going to be gone one day. You start a band, it's going to be gone one day. But if you make it your own and you live by that every day, and you truly, truly respect it and truly live it and share it with other people, I think that's how we can make this this movement be stronger and last forever. You know, like pass it into the young ones, pass it into your loved ones, pass it into the little community that you have, little or big community. I'm an educated person. I didn't finish school. I don't read that many books, but I use common sense to think about what's right and what's wrong, you know. And when you have these opportunities to be in a webinar and talk to people that maybe have a degree on something or they're super smart, it's challenging for people like me, you know. And thinking about all of that, you just start thinking, I'm gonna use these opportunities and I'm gonna make it my own, and I'm gonna make it make my own statements, you know, and follow what I really believe, turn it into direct action and practice it every day. I think that's my idea.
Yes, thank you so much, Jorge. No, that was it. Y'all nailed it. And oh my goodness, that part about the education. I'm not an educated person. I'm in community college right now, trying to get my associates, and I feel really self-conscious about that, you know, sometimes, especially because the activist nonprofit world is very braggy about, you know, who has a degree, who doesn't. And You know, I'm also undocumented. You know, my immigration status is also up in the air. So I think, yeah, you really nailed it. You hit it on the head as far as, like, you know, in these dynamics of displacement, who's being pushed out of even the movement itself, right? As we call ourselves so-called radicals, and yeah, who has access to these platforms, which is why I want to thank you for joining us and being here. Definitely, definitely. Damn, this is such a powerful moment. You know, I just want to appreciate the collective wisdom that y'all have brought to this space, the collection of ancestors of our people that have gathered here in this space. You know, really want to honor the fact that, you know, there's a lot of different communities, a lot of different folks right now present in this virtual room, and that yeah, I'm really grateful. Thank you all so much for being a part of this panel. And if it's okay with everybody, can we stay on maybe for just 5 minutes just to maybe answer a few Q&A questions that we have floating around? Is that okay?
Yeah.
All right, great. Well, thank you again to all of you. So incredible. Wow, y'all always wow me with the knowledge, the wisdom. Let me see. So one of the questions that I'm seeing right now, checking some of these. Okay, one of the questions that I'm seeing right now is, so COVID-19 is happening, right? There is this gap in our community as far as how we gather. What does it mean for us to gather during moments of COVID-19, and specifically strategically digitally, as knowing that, you know, like Henia said, you named it, a lot of these tech companies, they're mining for information. So what does it mean for us to strategically, like, continue to be in community with each other, even as this is all going on? If anybody wants to answer that.
Oh, sorry, I'm muted. I could try to answer part of that. You know, my background is information security. I've been doing IT security, digital forensics, malware, reverse malware, engineering, and network security assessments for close to 20 years now. As far as I know, I'm the only Native person that does what I do. But so one thing I always tell folks is that I've seen inside the belly of the beast. And if the so-called U.S. wants to learn about you, they will learn about you. That's one of the realities, is like the immense resources of violence that the United States has access to. They will turn that on you. So instead of, like, unless you're like really talking about some things that will give the state an excuse to lock you up, obviously don't discuss that on digital means. But we're just talking about organizing, you know, get-togethers and stuff like that. I don't think there should be like a real fear of using technologies to embrace those. But like I said, there's always tread lightly when you're talking about things that will give the state any excuse to lock you up. And one of the axioms I tell folks is that treat everything that you share, even if you think it's personal, as though someday it's going to be posted online for everyone to read or see. Besides your family, your enemies as well. That's one way of approaching it. So it's just about, you know, just being careful of what you're saying, being responsible, ultimately being responsible for what you say, and to use the appropriate technologies that spread that message out. That's one way of doing it. And the other way, since we're doing mutual aid work, you know, there's this misconception, especially from our own tribal governance, that, you know, we're going to be potential spreaders of COVID-19, but they don't take into the fact that, you know, we've done our studies, we do properly sanitize and, you know, don and doff PPE, stuff like that, to have that confidence that we are doing, we're taking the proper precautions not to spread it ourselves. And so that takes a lot of self-education, and there are definitely resources I could link in the chat where we've learned to do this. For example, like Indian Health Services has a free online course for food handling. You know, there's a free online course offered by Johns Hopkins University on contact tracing, which is beyond just contacting people, but actually educates yourself on how COVID-19 spreads from person to person or from item to person. So I think arming yourself with that knowledge is really going to be helpful on creating more fluid and more safer ways of maintaining contact and organizing without this specter or paranoia about what the United States, so-called United States, or other totalitarian regimes are able to see. To not let that hinder the work, but just understand that it's there, but don't give the state any excuse to remove you from the work.
Yes. Another question, which is...
Can I add to that a little bit, Ella, too?
Yeah, totally. Go for it.
I appreciate this. I was like, "Ooh, you got the insider knowledge. That's what's up." But and also, I think that take advantage, to go off of what Brandon said, take advantage of all the things that are being offered. There's so many convenings that are happening online right now, and so many skills that are being shared that you wouldn't have access to because you couldn't get there physically, or because it was in a different state or whatever. And now it's all online. And I would also say, like, there's a culture of fear right now that I think there's a right amount of like caution, and we have to be careful. And again, always protecting our vulnerable folks, and also understanding that there's still ways that you can meet in small committees with your crew outside somewhere to have the conversations you don't want to have digitally, right? There's still ways for you to find a forest to go sit, even apart from each other, whatever distance, 6 feet away from each other, to continue to have these conversations. And so also for us to kind of, and again, it goes back to your pods, who's in your pod. And I think that this time is also calling for a lot of really authentic communication and accountability between each other of like, how is your house moving? How is your house moving? How can I move in a way that's respectful to the people that you live with, and you move in a way that's respectful to the people that I live with? I live with somebody who's, severely immunocompromised, and the way that we move is like we talk through every pieces of it, and that in itself is is like such a good principle of organizing, right? And then how do you then not feel paralyzed by the fear of this moment to also continue to move? Because I do think that is something we have to watch out for, right? The more that people are isolated, and the more people are taught to be isolated, again, the privilege of being isolated, right? And then the fear of like going back outside and, getting people sick or getting yourself sick or whatnot. And so I think that, yes, there's ways to move around technology too, and to start opening up your pods as this lasts, because this, realistically speaking, this could last for a minute. This could be like a 2-year thing until there's an actual vaccine, which then the whole conversation about vaccines, but that's something else.
Right. And that's something else too, I think, to note is the work doesn't stop moving, right? Especially like we're continuing to see them build the pipelines up in Canada. They're still trying to like grab that land. They're still trying to, get at us in one way or another. So what does it mean for us to, again, like build that culture of resistance for the long term? Jorge, do you have anything to add?
No, not really.
Okay. Dale. Pues something else another question that we got from an anonymous person is, with so many things going on in the world, borders, prisons, folks unemployed, climate needs, generally undoing capitalism, returning land, where do we even start? I have conversations like this all the time with my friends, and that there is so much need, but we don't know the physical and practical steps to actually start with.
Do you want to take this one, Henia? I could go after you, or I could start.
Yeah, well, I was going to say if Jorge wanted to start, since he...
Jorge, yeah.
Yeah. So I don't think there is a start point, right? This question was asked to me a long time ago, but a really dear friend. And she will ask me, like, I don't know where to start. I don't know how to start resisting. I start creating all this resistance about what's happening in the world. And I said, well, you don't have to start anything. You just have to keep going. People has been resisting for centuries, for the whole existence of time, right? So when I decided to become what I am right now and what I do now, is because someone else was already doing it. So this is a question that can give you thousands of answers. Just look around you and look what's happening. You don't have to to really start in a certain point. You can just start looking at your own community around you and visualizing the things that you are good at and you can do, and that way you're gonna find that this ways to guide you through and change something.
Yeah, and I have, sorry, I don't know if this is okay to do, but I have something to actually add on to that question. How do we prevent folks from doing it wrong? Because Jorge and I, so we live in Utah, and this punk band here in Utah just donated PPE directly to the cops, I think. And to me, that's just, what is happening, right? Because, I mean, first of all, it's not punk to support incarceration. But then on top of that, I just, where did we miss the step that they thought that this was radical? So I guess to add on to that question of like, where do we start? Also, what do we do to make sure that the work doesn't go awfully wrong and teaches people the wrong kind of propaganda, I guess, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Go ahead, Brandon. I'll go after you.
Oh. Yeah, wow. That's I think what helped me understand this is like it can seem so overwhelming, right? That there's so much going on, and it often is used as an excuse, like, well, you're either for this or you're either for that. And it goes back to, you know, what Angela Davis and Audre Lorde said, you know, we're not single issue people, okay? These are not single issue things that affect us, you know? That's why I think where Black feminisms has really taught us about intersectionality, that there are structures in place that affect us all, that these aren't lone events that are separate. They're all connected in some way. And for me, that connection is capitalism. Like if we're stridently anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-patriarchal, anti-racist, and you base your principles on that, then you'll always find that all these threads that seem numerous actually connect to these four very similar structures. And so it takes, you know, 1,000 different enemies into four. And I call these the enemies of the net. I call these the enemies of good people of the earth, you know, these structures that we can slay them together. And if we can continue to base our principles on being anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, anti-racist, and anti-patriarchal, that turns a very large problem into a very small one, when it's very manageable. And if we continue, you know, like sometimes for example, like the green capitalist movement, you know, thinking that we could, you know, still buy our way out of the harm that's being done to the environment. You know, that's simply not true as long as capitalism still exists. You know, I may call myself anti-patriarchal, but I'll always be a perpetrator of patriarchy as long as patriarchy exists, no matter how often I say I'm anti-patriarchal. So we have to ensure that these structures are destroyed. And it doesn't matter what organization you're a part of, as long as you are stridently anti-capitalist, anti-colonial, you know, that could be your guiding principles. And that goes back to what I said earlier, is like, you know, build those guiding principles, because you'll find organizations who will go along with that. It's not going to be 100% all the time, but that's the goal, is to incorporate all of those, your guiding principles into the work that you do in your everyday life, because you'll find that they all connect and that there's a common enemy that perpetuates this violence committed against all of us. And so it takes a lot of studying. It takes a lot of, you know, skill sharing. Often we're reduced to the labor that we're able to provide. I think that comes from like a capitalist mindset, right? Like we're only as valuable as our labor. But to also understand that we have specific gifts or abilities that don't always require like a physical manifestation of it. So we all have unique gifts and abilities that fit into this larger movement of liberation, and to recognize those unique gifts and abilities that you have, to not just get an edge up on someone, but to contribute to the overall destruction of these structures that harm us all.
Nice.
I was just gonna say bless. Whoa, that was that ending. Go ahead, Enya, please.
I'm so glad you both just dropped some gems. You don't have to start anywhere, just keep going. Jorge, thank you for bringing all the ancestors into this, and Brandon, thank you for bringing intersectionality. I agree. I'm like snapping fingers to everything that you both just said. I think if you don't know where to start, you know, because you have too many places to start from, just pick one. Just do a thing, you know. Just, I think sometimes, yeah, there are a lot of problems, and I think there's this martyr complex, I think they call it, where like, you know, that organizing burnout, where if I don't show up to the meeting, it's not going to go down or whatever. It's like, you're not saving the whole world all by yourself. Chill out. If you miss this meeting, the meeting's still going to happen. And I think we have this notion of, there's everything wrong in the world, I have to tackle it all. No, that's not realistic, and that's not what the world needs us to do, right? The world just needs us to do what's in front of you. Is there something that you could do? I know that folks start with direct service. Is there some direct service? Is there some like something that you could do tomorrow with some of these friends? You say that, you know, you've been talking with your friends, like what is one small step that you can take? And then there's something to be said about like getting something done and getting a little taste of it, and then you'll want to do more, right? And it's also like, how do you learn to flex your muscle? How do you learn to build up confidence to be able to do things, to do more and more and more? And I would say, if you're already connecting with friends, you know, to go back to the guiding principles that Brandon mentions, how are you going to relearn history? Relearn the history of the place you're at, for sure. Relearn your own history, relearn all the, you know, undo everything the myths that you learned in your school textbooks, and relearn the history so you can understand how we got to where we are and how these systems work, right? And so maybe with a group of friends, that's something that y'all could do as you start taking your steps, is how are you educating each other? And, you know, one thing I'll share, and Ella knows this because we were in the same place when that happened, but I got to a place where I was so burnt out on going to meetings and whatnot, and I felt like things weren't moving forward, and we had some wins and we felt good, and I felt stuck. And so I actually took a step back and I started inviting people over to my house for tea, because that's what my grandmother has taught me, that time to take tea. And then I started doing these gatherings with friends on, you know, every month. At the time it was a brunch where we would swap clothing swaps and brunch with a lot of my sisters, and we built in that way, right? And from those conversations you also get to know like, where do we tap in and whatnot. And so I think getting creative too with like, how do you show up and how do you have conversations, that it doesn't always have to look like the traditional organizing meetings. And again, going back to right now, we do need to be creative. And so I understand that gathering right now with 30 people might not be an option, but how do you gather with people in another way and just pick one thing to go for, and learn to build and flex your muscle in that way. And then
yes, absolutely. yes, more tea parties, more moments of joyful resistance. We're definitely running over the time that I told Joe we would be here. I'm so sorry, but we have one more question, and I actually think it's a really good one, so I feel like we should you know, answer it. Last question, and we can wrap it up if that's okay. This one jumped up to me because it's actually about Standing Rock. We got the Standing Rock question. So I'm gonna read it, and it says, "Good evening, and thank you to all of you for hosting this important meeting. I really enjoyed it so far. I have a question. I live in Northeast Oklahoma in the Cherokee Nation, and I'm Cherokee. Some of my students at the university I work at attended the Uplift conference last fall, but I was unable to attend. I really wanted to be here. Or I really wanted to be there. We have a very specific issue in our region with Tyson Simmons, other industrial chicken manufacturers and processors polluting our land and our water. I have spent the past 2 years using my voice in person and on social media to get people to care and pay attention. There are now a handful of us who are working to bring conversation and solution together surrounding this issue, but it's not enough. How can we spread our message and build a movement to protect the water in our region from corporate interests in a way that Standing Rock did? How do we actualize this movement?" And I just want to say, first of all, full disclaimer, I think Standing Rock conversations are always really interesting because Standing Rock was a very singular moment, right? Especially for those of us that were a part of that movement. You know, there's the media perspective of what Standing Rock was. There's the movement perspective of what Standing Rock was. And even then, there's different movements within the movement perspective that have ideas of what Standing Rock was. Right, so I do want to honor that, you know, especially in the panel talking about creative resistance, right, that from the media perspective, there's a lot of ways to grab media, the media's attention, but also to build an intentional movement like Standing Rock was. I think that's generations of building. There is a reason why Standing Rock happened the way that it happened, and that's, you know, I know other folks in this panel could talk a little bit more about that. If anybody wants to join this conversation, go ahead, the mic is yours. You're muted.
Okay. So what I could probably start with, and you hit the nail right on the head. This is like, it wasn't just, Standing Rock just wasn't like happened randomly, right? It was like the culmination of, like you said, generations of tensions, generations, centuries of broken promises, violence committed towards Native people by settler society. And it all like, and just because Standing Rock happened doesn't mean it's not going to happen again, right? It's like a volcano. It'll always build new fertile grounds for resistance every time it erupts. And I think Standing Rock did that. It built more fertile ground for resistance for Native people to build upon. But specifically, and towards Standing, I mean, I always tell people you can ask 7 people about Standing Rock and you'll get like 49 different answers. You know, this seems like a multiplier of what their opinions are on that. But it's a really good book written by a good relative of mine, Dr. Nick Estes. He wrote a book called Our History is the Future, and talks specifically about Standing Rock and what led to not only that moment, that continuation of resistance, but also the history that led to it and the future that can be possible for it. Yeah, there it is. Yeah, he's always jokingly say I'm the tallest Hopi in the world, and he always jokingly says that he's the shortest Lakota in the world because we're both over 6 feet. And
I think I heard that in a podcast just the other day. I was laughing so hard.
And it's awful because it's like, why do people who are over 6 feet have to mention that? But anyway, and I just fell into my own cringe response to that. But he wrote a really great book on how to build resistance and the tradition of over 500 years of resistance to colonialism that appears to that. So I think that's a really good start, is to read that book and learn the history of resistance and how to build your own community into that. And of course, it's like the easy thing, the tactical things, right? It's the strategy that's harder to build. Tactically, I can think of like 1,000 different things, from just being an anarchist organizer. Like, there's the old axiom of direct action gets the goods, right? Like, what direct things can you do to bring attention to what's going on? Me not being a member of the Cherokee Nation, I can't tell you what's traditionally appropriate or culturally appropriate for you, but there are direct things that you can do. There's millions of zines about direct action that you can take on that, but to make it a sustainable movement, you have to really think long term, 5 years down the road, like what the impacts are going to be, the benefits and the consequences of building a movement that directly challenges this. So those are things you have to think about, like think strategically, because like the protest marches, everything that's easy. Those are actually easy things to do, like to drum up support, to carry a sign, to march down a road, to get arrested. Those are easy. I mean, it's easy to get arrested. But the long-term strategy, that's something that you have to develop and to draw upon your own people's centuries of resistance and culture. Because you'll find, I know it's frustrating to have dialogue about it now and not have it move forward, but it's the youth that often pull those conversations forward. And you're a part of that youth. You're part of that, you're part of that agitation within your community to continue to bring that, to turn those conversations into direct actions to achieve a longer term strategy. And so for me, from my experience with, organizing with elders in my community, is they know that. They know they themselves have probably been arrested 50 years ago, 20 years ago, fighting resource exploitation projects. I come from a long line of people who have been arrested, is what I could say, and fought and continued resistance. But what speaks to them now is like, what's the long-term strategy? Like how can we, I mean, obviously it's easy to say, yes, we get clean water, but how do we pull in other people outside of this to achieve that longer term strategy? And there's another really powerful thing that I heard at Standing Rock is that that was told to us from a Lakota elder, was that because people were like they like to romanticize the idea of being a martyr, as you said, of like, yeah, we should have like charged those fences and all that stuff. And there's like so different ways that people talk about Standing Rock or other protests, other physical encampments that are blocking further encroachment into our territories. And this Lakota elder said, like, we've died enough, like we've died enough. Like there's no reason for us to continue the settler project of extinction for ourselves by risking our lives. So that's one thing I like to keep in mind too. Like there's this romanticization that we should have fought to the last man, so to speak. Keep in mind that we've died enough, we've suffered enough, we've been arrested enough. Like there are more creative ways than dying. There are more creative ways of being arrested and then having the state to continue its project against you. So I'm not romanticizing that. I'm not romanticizing arrest. I'm not romanticizing like a final stand. There are more creative ways of doing that, and only you can do that in your community by building, that discourse within your own community and find out what's culturally appropriate, or if tradition is hindering you from being creative, from being a creative resistor. And so that's the best advice I can give you. Because like I said, the direct action stuff, that's always going to be there. Protest marches, stuff like that. But think longer term strategies. So.
Ella, I see you like, who's next? You just said it with your face. I love it. I want to keep my sharing pretty brief for a variety of reasons. I think that Brandon said a lot of things, and I think there's a book out there, and so reading the book is a really good idea. I keep hearing about this book, but I'm glad to hear it's good. And what I'll add to that is, first I want to speak as an ally. I'm not indigenous to this continent. So I want to first name that, right? Not over here trying to give any kind of advice to indigenous folks about how to lead resistance on their own territory. The only thing that I'll say is that Standing Rock was a movement moment, and one of those moments that just it happens, and there's a lot of reasons why this moment sparked, and knowing the history and knowing all the moments that led up to that one, the history of resistance, of just like indigenous resistance in this country, and then also of that particular place. But as far as who showed up and how people showed up, the only thing that I want to share on that is there was years of building. There was years of trust building. There was years of training that led up to those moments. And so the camps that formed at Standing Rock, of folks who were coming from outside of Standing Rock, were people who had been fighting on different territories and who had been learning from each other and doing direct action trainings and having conversations around principles and, and resistance for many, many, many years leading up to that one. And so that also, there like that history in itself too. So how can you spread a message and how can you build a movement? I think it's what's in your region. And again, I want to shout out the Southwest, because so much building that happened in the Southwest led to so many folks being at Standing Rock together and trusting each other and having been on the front line together and having flexed that muscle together, developed that muscle together. And so what is in the region, and like who are the folks who are training and how can deepening that commitment, because there's those moments where there's those moments that call for you to go in, right? There's those moments is like, are you ready? Like, is your spirit ready for this? Is your body ready for this? And also a shout out to some of the OG Black Panthers out here in Oakland that, have said, like, if you're not training, you ain't no warrior. They're like, are you training? Are you running a mile? Are you doing your are you doing your cardio? Can you run if you need to, right? And so like, what kind of like the training, the mental and the physical training are you doing, and are your folks doing? And if that's where you have to start, then that's where you start, right? Because I personally don't know how to spark another moment like that, because who knows when the next one will pop off, and who knows what it will be about. But I think trying to recreate it doesn't feel feasible for me. But the training that went into it, the relationship building, the years and years and years and years of that can happen from wherever you are right now. And, you know, within your region, within your bioregion, because, you know, fuck these fake ass borders, right? But like, who are you building with, and who are you training with to be ready for a moment like that? Whether y'all are the ones that call for it or somebody else in your area is. That's all I wanted to add to that.
Yes, no, thank you. As we are wrapping up this panel, Jorge, do you have anything you'd like to contribute to that, as well as any closing thoughts from all of y'all?
No, really, I'm all right. I pretty happy about hearing what they had to answer about that question. So that was pretty informative for me, for myself.
Thank you. I know that we actually, you and me, Jorge, we met right before me and Henia and everybody went to Standing Rock together, right? And that was something beautiful too, to witness, you know, as Henia spoke, all of the established connections and the living ecosystem that is alive, not just in our community as a whole, but also in ourselves, right? All of the stars that had to align to lead to that moment of beautiful resistance. So yes, yes. Beautiful, beautiful, critical, intentional resistance. Any closing thoughts from Brandon or Henia?
Do you want to go, Henia?
Oh, sure. I'm just mad grateful to all of our ancestors and all of the moments that have come before this moment for us to be able to be in this virtual circle together. I feel mad replenished and energized and really inspired by what you've shared, both Brandon and Jorge. And, you know, Ella, thank you for bringing all of us together, like just knowing that we would be coming from these different walks of life and these different experiences. And yeah, I don't have more answers than anybody who's watching right now, who I'm learning from as well, right? And I think that, but I do think that this is a moment where there is a huge crack in the system, and we got to take advantage of it, right? And that, on whatever it means, short term and long term, there is a crack in the system, and no, we're not going back to that normal, because that normal did not work for us and our people. And so how do we continue to work through this and talk through this and train through this and build ourselves up through this? And I'm mad grateful for spaces like this, because this feels like part of the way there. So again, shukran so much for having us, Ella, and Uplift Climate.
Yeah, thank you. I really appreciate you all. I always love getting like a healthy perspective, like a healthy mix of perspectives on what's going on, because oftentimes we find ourselves in a bubble. So that's probably like one last piece of advice, is to reach outside your bubble and get other healthier perspectives of people who have been doing the organizing work. Because like I said, we all don't have the answers, but we'll get really close the more we have these conversations, the more we come together and realize that our struggles are not so different. And to, especially for the younger organizers, and we know it's, like I said, it's easier to do the direct action stuff, like the marches, but to prepare for like the day-to-day stuff, like preparing the webinar, the administrative tasks, you know, these are all skills that need to be learned. I work a full-time job, and I set aside time to do this. Like I had the privilege of having a full-time job, but it took me a long time just to acquire basic organizing skills. So besides attending marches, besides speaking on the megaphone or being a panelist on an amazing webinar, learn those day-to-day organizing skills. Because to be honest, like these organizing skills are unfairly burdened among non-cis hetero men. And so for the cis hetero men who are part of this, like step up in these organizing skills, instead of like just taking space, what I call the Indian man, the microphone syndrome. Like, you know, take up the day-to-day work of organizing. It's a day-to-day grind to continuously fight capitalism and to build autonomy and to have the discipline to follow through on that day-to-day grind. But to also have the discipline to take care of yourself, as Henia had said earlier, to not feel shame for not producing labor, but a healthy you is a healthy collective. A healthy you is a healthy society. And not just for the gain for yourself, but for all of us. Because like I said, this pandemic has proven that all we have is each other. Ultimately, all we have is each other. And we all need to be healthy and happy and live dignified lives to continue on the long-term project of liberation. So thank you again for everyone. And thank you for inviting me to be a part of this panel.
Thank you so much for those words. Jorge, do you have any closing thoughts?
Yeah. So just want to say thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this. So happy to hear Henia and Brandon. It's beautiful words, and it's a learning experience still to me, you know. Uplift climate, I'm looking forward to see what's coming in the future. And I'm really grateful to be able to use this space this time to talk to, I don't know how many people, but I'm sure a lot of people are there. And just keep resisting, you know. It's just a moment when you have to think in your life what you want to do for the future and how can you improve to make this world better. I think as long as you bring all those ideas into practice, you can do a lot of positive things, you know. Be around the people that you love and try to work with them and create some change. Everything starts from you, and it will expand bigger and bigger and stronger every time. That's what I have to say.
Yes, beautiful connections, beautiful resistance. Thank you so much to our incredible audience for all of your thoughtful questions. And thank you all as we continue to do this work. I think something that's really exciting for me about Uplift is that we are committed to hosting more webinars like these, having more of these conversations, especially again, like trying really to delve into the gaps between organizing and community. Because truly community organizing is all of us, you know. We're all community organizers and we're all actively resisting. So why not resist together? Thank you so much again, Brandon, Henia, Jorge. It's been incredible. Thank you all so much for staying so late. This has definitely been a learning lesson for me as well. And I hope everybody has a very beautiful rest of your night. Have a good rest of your day. This has been Uplift webinar.
And we're out.
Yes.